Just a kind of a funny note. Earlier when I was talking about 15 years ago, what would the old you say to you if you showed up and said, hey, you're not going to believe this, but you're going to be looking into this? Just 6 years ago. 6 years ago today, Rob Skiba got a notification on Facebook that we became friends 6 years ago on Facebook. And that's prior to Seed. This was just when I was searching for some other things, whether it be Nephilim, whether it be what's going on with Israel. A lot of this, teachings that Rob was doing, I was on this search. And it was humbling, very humbling. And that's why before we went to the break, I said to the media, don't be afraid to research. Don't be afraid to tell the truth. Years ago when somebody got into journalism, I don't know what it's like here, but in the States when you're going to school for it, they taught you take it really serious. That a journalist has a duty to tell the truth. Not coattail an agenda or a partisanship. And I think that's the biggest problem that we have, is that there's a left wing and a right wing. And the media is either going to lean on one wing or the other. The problem is it's the same bird. It's the same bird. If you're not willing to step off that bird's back. Don't be afraid to tell the truth. Don't be afraid to tell the truth. Don't be afraid to break programming. Now, you may not be able to make your rent after they fire you. But would you rather live a lie and keep telling them, or let the truth set you free? It's that simple. So, on that note, guy that I got to meet, actually I went down to Rob's place. We were working on some seed stuff. Flew down to Texas. Actually looked at relocating to Dallas so that we could work on this more. And Rob and I took a road trip down to Austin, Texas, to a conference down there, where I actually met Robbie Davidson for the first time. We had been friends via phone, Skype, those types of things. But there's this other guy that shows up. He's just there to go to the conference. And this guy's been on fire since then. It's been a pleasure watching him develop and grow. And I actually think he grew a couple more inches. And for those of you that know, I'm a tall guy. This guy's tall too. Please welcome to the stage Mr. Matt Long.
Yeah. Is this thing on?
What's that? Tear it up, buddy. Matt Long, everybody.
I know what you guys are thinking. What is the t-shirt guy doing up on stage right now? It's funny how I was going to come up here, kind of treat you guys like a doctor would, where maybe we'd have an appointment and have you guys sit down here and wait for me for about 35 minutes. Then I'd show up, spend about 5 or 10 minutes with you, and evaluate y'all's situations. And I don't know that there's many worse places being stuck other than a doctor's office, maybe the DMV. I don't know if y'all are familiar with that here. But I imagine probably the worst would be being stuck on a spinning ball flying through space in an infinite, ever-expanding universe. So, in all seriousness, I kind of feel like a televangelist with this thing on. I'm gonna pass the offering plate here in a little bit, and you guys just throw in there whatever you feel like. So, in all seriousness, I actually owe all of my prowess as a t-shirt folder to Rick Hummer, who was my mentor in that department, teaching me the retail fold at last year's conference in Raleigh. And Robbie will tell you, I actually requested to do it again here because I really like getting to know everyone as they were coming in and see all the people where they're coming from. And also, it was also kind of selfish because I figured, like, if I knew all of you guys by name by the time I got up here, I'd be less nervous. And I have a funny feeling, even though we're all in the same room, we're all talking about the same stuff, I feel like I'm a little bit more nervous than you guys might be. I'm definitely more nervous than when I was watching other people talk. So, but Cami runs a tight ship out there at the registration. She got onto me for forgetting Nolan's VIP stuff, so, man, I apologize. But I was backstage, kind of in that last intimate moment, deciding whether I should go pee one more time, and I made the call not to. So we're gonna find out if that was a good idea or not. So, but along those lines, I want to give you guys some advice. I know it's easier to avoid awkward situations like meeting new people, but I just want to invite you that while you're here, just try to relax, be yourselves, and I promise you'll meet some great folks, have some great conversations, and start to forge relationships that are deeper and more meaningful than the ones that you came here to get away from. So I want to thank Robbie for having me. He's been a huge supporter of mine and a great asset to our community. And I really appreciate everything that he's done. He's a tremendous professional, and that's obvious with all the conferences he puts on and any project he puts his name on. And we're all lucky to have him standing up and celebrating truth. I first met Robbie. You guys got a little bit of a spoiler, thanks to Rick, who didn't know what I was going to talk about here. But I met Robbie at the Back to the Future conference down in Austin, Texas, put on by John Gabrielson back there. And no offense to Robbie, but I actually went there to try and meet Rob Skiba. Mostly so I could stand in front of him and say, "You're the reason I can't sleep at night." And I've heard a couple of people in here have that same connection. So Rob, thanks. But I had a great time down there. I got to meet John, Rick as well. And Robbie and I just became fast friends. And so while I really appreciate all his contributions to the community, I actually more appreciate your friendship, man. And I'm humbled and honored to be in such an awesome group of speakers. So thank you. So to start, my name is Matt Long, and you've met me at a very strange time in my life. I'm from a city called Fort Worth. That's in the country of Texas, in case you guys didn't know that. That's where my social media name comes from, FLATWORTH, because I'm from Fort Worth, and Flat Earth plus Fort Worth equals FLATWORTH. You can find me at FLATWORTH on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, and I'm currently co-hosting the Flat Earth podcast with David Weiss of Deep Inside the Rabbit Hole, who is another great contributor to the community, probably does more in the shadows than anybody. And I'd much rather have him on our team than the other side, so... and while I'd love to connect with all of you guys on those platforms out there in the ether, I'd really just prefer you guys come up and say hey and shake my hand and get to know you guys. So please come up if you haven't already. Today, I'm not reading. Okay. Today, I'm going to visit with you a little bit about what I believe is the proper mindset when searching for truth in this world and why there's such an indifference of the population, specifically the Christian church, on topics like the shape of the earth. If you've watched any of my stuff, you'll know that I have a biblical worldview, and most of my content is aimed at people that claim to have the same worldview, yet cling unsubstantiated to the heliocentric model, almost as if they created it themselves, as I know Robbie and some other guys in here can attest to. And while I won't apologize for my biblical mindset, I'll at least give you fair warning. And even if you don't share the same view as me, I hope you can at least agree that there is such thing as good and evil in this world, and that battle is something that surpasses the importance of the shape of the earth, and also is in fact the cause of the deception. So if we can agree on at least that, I'm confident that you'll get something from this talk, which is aimed in large part inward towards myself and anyone else that it happens to speak to. So just encourage you to listen. I will ask that regardless of your worldview, if you'll reserve judgment and at least save any shoe or lettuce throwing to the very end, that'll be good. So, should I stop telling jokes? I feel like they're not translating very well across the border. I thought Alberta is a Texas of Canada, right? So, anyways, so. That's what a good speaker will do. He'll wait and see if you're responding to jokes. If not, he'll actually insert something where he's supposed to ask if he's not being funny. So, all right, I'll take the hint. So, a little bit about my story. Okay, I grew up playing tennis and developed a fairly unhealthy obsession with being a professional athlete. I had a totally disillusioned mindset when it came to the importance of sports in my life. My self-worth was completely tied up in being a tennis player, and I lived in the emotional peaks and valleys of success and failure based solely on what happened on the court that day. Couple that with being a ball earther, trying to calculate and account for the spin of the earth on each and every shot, made for a completely unsuccessful career, 0 Wimbledon titles, no gold medals, and no Hall of Fame inductions. Still love the game, though, especially now that I know we're stationary. It's way easier. So you don't have to aim towards the east anymore. I entered the business world first in the industry of construction, which is still a large part of my daily life. And I now have other businesses, mostly in the energy sector, which now fund my healthy obsession with the Bible and truth. For me, the importance of the topic of flat earth fluctuates as I dig and discover more each day. And while it may not be a salvation issue for a current Christian, as I understand it right now, as the deceptions of our world grow greater and greater, I believe that people's ability to discern truth and believe the words of their Bible may become directly related to the shape of the earth, almost as if it's the key that unlocks the code. That's total admitted speculation on my part, but I believe it's grounded in some sound deduction. At the very least, research into flat earth should absolutely make someone question and begin to filter the information that they absorb every day. And while I do think the earth is flat, I would much rather my content encourage someone to think and question as opposed to ultimately accept my view of the shape of the earth. So my personal flat earth story actually begins with a time in my life when I had some atheistic leanings. It's a nice way to say it. I went to an Episcopalian school, and despite being there for 5 years, I only remember taking one Bible class and don't remember a thing that I learned in it. I was actually trying to think this morning if I could even remember the teacher's name, and I couldn't. So I read some books. I thought I was smart. Definitely thought I was too smart for the Bible. I thought that was something, that was like God was something that weak people needed. That was my opinion. In fact, there's a quote. It says, "It's funny how the less the Bible is read, the more it's interpreted." Well, it wasn't until about 10 years ago when I started actually reading the Bible for myself that I was actually able to change my mindset, which was previously only based on the opinions of others. And once I did start reading it, I found out that it was completely different than what I thought. And I also found out that by only reading a small amount, I already knew far more than what most people knew about what it actually said. I realized that the Bible was not just a single source of information, but over 60 sources compiled by over 40 different authors in a compilation to help us navigate this place. I started to appreciate the idea of letting the Bible interpret the Bible by watching a California pastor, or listening to a California pastor by the name of Chuck Smith, who I randomly caught on the radio one day, and I couldn't stop listening to because he sounded like an old hippie surfer. It didn't sound like any pastor I'd ever heard. But all he did was simply read the Bible and teach what the Bible said about the Bible. My first big realization was finding out that the Bible and evolution were mutually exclusive. You could not believe the biblical account of kinds producing after their own kinds and the Darwinian ideals of macroevolution. I also found out that the geological column and the fossil record were way better explained through the flood of Noah than by billions and billions of years of non-catastrophic processes. And when I read 2 Peter 3, where it says, "In the last days, scoffers will come, saying, 'Where is the promise of his coming? For all things continue as they have from the beginning,'" he's speaking about uniformitarianism, which is the doctrine upon which evolution is based. And so here I was reading a book that was written almost 2,000 years ago, talking about exactly what was happening today. My mind was blown, and I was hooked. That sparked a huge interest in the creation story and Genesis in general, which led me to study a lot about the Nephilim, or the giants that are mentioned in Genesis 6 and throughout the Bible, that were the offspring of angels and humans. It started to look like the history of this place was something closer to Lord of the Rings than Planet of the Apes. And it was also interesting, like I was intrigued by the fact that people could read the same book and come out with differing opinions on things like the Nephilim, the Trinity, the rapture, predestination, and now the shape of the earth. My Nephilim research led me to watch a lot of Rob Skiba's stuff, who's one of, if not the best Nephilim researcher out there. And as you know, when you watch YouTube, sometimes you can't see the full title of the video you're about to watch. Well, one day I saw a video that said, "Rob Skiba, how I got into ... And it was that seemingly insignificant ... that changed my life. It was an interview he did on Patricia Steer's show, and I thought, oh, cool, I want to see how Skiba got into the Nephilim, because he's how I got into the Nephilim. So I clicked on it, started watching it for about the first 15 minutes, and Rob talked about his Nephilim stuff and a couple other projects that he's worked on over the years. And then he said, and then I got stuck on flat freaking earth of all things. I took that in. I listened a little bit more. He talked about Canary Cry Radio. He mentioned Mark Sargent, Flat Earth Clues. And then he said he did what he should have done at the beginning, which was go see what the Bible said about it. And as soon as I did that, I was done. Because the Bible, if read literally, is unequivocally a flat earth book. All you have to do, I could talk about all the verses, but all you have to do is Google Hebrew cosmology, and you'll see what the ancient Hebrews, and all the authors of the Bible for that matter, believed about the shape of their world. He mentioned a guy named Math Powerland. So the second video I watched was Mr. Flat Earth President himself, who asked me the question, photo or painting? I started looking for podcasts, found David Weiss and Deep Inside the Rabbit Hole, and my world was changed immediately, forever. Not necessarily because of any one proof, but because I believe what the Bible says, and I believe that God has endowed me and all of us, if we choose to accept it, with an ability to recognize truth. And I'll back that up here in a moment with Scripture. Now, remember when we met a little bit ago and I told you I had like this unhealthy obsession with being a pro athlete? Well, about the time when I'm going through this realization, I had decided that since I couldn't make it as a tennis player, I was actually going to try to be a football player. And I know that sounds random, but I actually played football in high school and almost played in college, but I wanted to play Division I sports, and tennis was my best shot at that. But I always regretted when I got finished with tennis not giving football a bigger chance. And so one thing I found out about myself is while I like physical contact a lot more than most tennis players, apparently I like it a lot less than most football players, which made me a really good quarterback, by the way, because they have people like protecting them so they don't get hit. I didn't even like get my uniform dirty, you know. So I played semi-pro for a few years, and I tried out for some Canadian teams. The Eskimos was one of them. They had a tryout down in Fort Worth, actually. So I tried out for them and maybe the Alouettes and whoever Saskatchewan is. I can't remember the name of the... He says they're not important, so... Nice. Oh, man. All right, so anyway, I ended up getting picked up by a professional indoor team out of Abilene, Texas. Not sure if y'all have ever heard of that place, but it's okay if you haven't. Not missing much. And the coolest thing was that I was going to get to actually pursue this with one of my best friends and favorite wide receiver from my previous team, a guy named Kyle Biddlecombe, who does a lot of cool video and photo work and helps out with FLATWORTH a lot. And if you happen to see my Vegas video, Kyle put all that together. I've without a doubt thrown more non-backyard touchdowns to Kyle. The backyard record's held by my younger brother. But he's without a doubt the most talented receiver I've ever played with. So the day after I have my Flat Earth awakening, I'm going through a training session, and this ex-NFL guy is putting Kyle and I through all these drills and stuff. And I can remember I was doing dips on the bleachers or something and looking up into like a cloudless blue sky, which we don't have many of anymore. But I was looking at a cloudless blue sky thinking, man, none of this matters. I was in a strange state of indifference to the one thing I'd wanted my entire life, which was to be a pro athlete. But I believe God changed my heart that day and wrote something new on it. And one night while we were making the drive back from Abilene to Fort Worth, about a 2-hour drive, I told Kyle, I was like, man, I've got something to tell you, and it's going to freak you out, is what I told him. I feel like it took me like 20 minutes to say it. Pretty sure he thought I was going to say I was gay. Like, I was pretty sure. I was recently divorced. It was 2 dudes in a car late at night. I don't know. I am currently sharing a room with another guy, and a jacuzzi is in it. So the rule was no, you couldn't get in the jacuzzi at the same time, and no staring at the other guy while you were in the jacuzzi. So those were the rules, Jake. So then I told my ex-wife, who I think probably also thought I was coming out of the closet, but probably would have been some nice closure for her, but it wasn't the case. Then I told a few more people, then a few more, then essentially the world on Facebook and YouTube. And while this wasn't something I was necessarily looking for, I do feel like I was uniquely chosen to help spread God's word as it specifically relates to cosmology. Slightly because of my willingness to listen and consider before speaking, But I think mostly for my willingness to just get up, stand up, and look stupid so that other people can learn in the safety of their own homes. Kind of use me as their shield, if it were. But I do think there are worse things to stand up and look stupid for than the veracity of God's word, so no big deal. Thanks, Mom. I got to use that joke. All right, okay. So in relation to that, the other day I was walking around a golf tournament with a buddy, and we talked about crazy stuff. RH negative blood, flat earth, tiny homes. And we ended up where all really interesting conversations end, the Unabomber Manifesto. And he proceeded to describe me as the most interesting man in America. Now, while I venture to humbly say I doubt he's met every man in America, he's extremely well-traveled, so I'll take the compliment. But it most certainly stems from simply my willingness to tell people what I'm about and what I believe in. And it ensures that I'm only surrounded by people that support what I believe because they know what I believe. It's because I gave up caring what people think a long time ago. And as all the speakers in here can attest, in this game, if you care what people think, you're vulnerable. Concern yourself with what God thinks, and you'll be blessed with an extremely interesting life. In addition to that, my cousin Jacob has taught me to pray for divine appointments throughout my day. And that's been a great adventure, too. A couple weeks ago, I was driving back from I was having some really strange stuff happen in my life through different trolls and things on the internet. But, it was like evil, spiritual warfare type stuff. I was driving back from the town I was driving back from Granbury, and I was approaching, as I was coming into a town called Crescent, I was actually wanting to find a good place to shoot the sunset, which if you go to my Instagram, there's a lot of really cool sunset and sunrise pics and videos. And as I'm coming into this town, which is renowned for having this train that stops traffic for 30 minutes on end, I see about a half-mile worth of taillights, and I decide, I'm just going to turn around, go the opposite direction, and just let God kind of guide me. So as I'm heading down the road, wondering if I'm going the right way, I come across a street, and I look at the name, and it says Sun Chase Road, which I'm literally driving west, chasing the sun. And I have to come to a stop because there was a coiled up rattlesnake in the path of my car. So I did what everyone does when they see a giant snake, right? I stopped and I started throwing pennies at it, see if it was alive. And I had a couple direct hits, and it didn't move, so I was sure that it was dead. Still didn't go up and touch it, but I was sure it was dead. Later that night, I reached out to a few people regarding the evil stuff that I was talking about was going on. And one of them was my cousin Jacob, who I told you taught me to pray for these type of appointments in my life. And I told him about what was going on. I didn't tell him anything about my road experience. But he said, like the good prayer warrior that he is, he said a really great prayer, denounced the whole thing. And then he said, all right, now let me know if you find any dead snakes in your path. And, that's when the chills hit, obviously, and I told him what had happened. But that kind of stuff happens to me all the time. So I genuinely feel as though I'm on the right path and I'm spreading the truth according to God's word and his will. And I tell you all that to lead into my topic on mindset and cognitive dissonance as it relates to flat earth, which I deem a large part of the nature of existence, so only slightly important, I guess. So, I got a question. Who here decided to wear clothes today? Pretty much everybody? Yeah, I did too. Okay, cool. Yeah, nice. Rick said his wife made him. Clothes say a lot about a person, don't they? A man may wear a suit to look professional or successful. A guy like me might wear a T-shirt to be comfortable or appear approachable, or maybe I'm lazy. But don't ask me about women's clothes because they wear that stuff for each other, so I have no idea on that stuff. But while clothes can absolutely speak to the type of person that you are, they're not you. When I go to bed tonight, I'm going to take these clothes off, and the real me, everything that's left, is going to go to sleep. And just like, and I guess in that same fashion, to use a pun, one day we're going to take these bodies off too. And while and just like clothes Your body can say a lot about the things that you value or give insight into your inner person. But once again, it's not the real you. The real you that can make sounds in your head without moving your mouth, or the you that can see places you've been without going there or even opening your eyes. So in the spirit of acknowledging that this concept is totally foreign to us, why wouldn't we start this investigation into the nature of the world that we can't observe with the nature of the world that we can observe? Because according to my Bible, they were both created by the same person. And just like clothes and your body can tell people a lot about you, the creation can tell us a lot about the Creator. I'm going to paraphrase these next verses, but in John 1, we see that He created all things. In Romans 1, we know that the invisible things of God, including His eternal power, can be seen through the things that were made. And because of that, we are without excuse in acknowledging Him. In 2 Peter 3, Peter says how some are willingly ignorant to the fact that in the beginning, the earth was standing out of water and in water. We get further clarification in Genesis 1 when God creates the firmament to separate those very same waters, the waters above and the waters below. Then in Psalm 19, we see that while the heavens declare His glory, it's this same firmament that shows His handiwork. And this creation speaks to us day by day and shows knowledge by night, and there is no language where its voice is not heard. So if we can see in Romans how knowledge of the creation can teach us about the invisible things of God, this is also backed up in Job 38 when Job questions God. God replies, "Who is this that darkeneth counsel by words without knowledge?" And then God challenges his lack of knowledge by taking him on a verbal tour of creation, starting with the question, "Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth?" So is it okay to take a hard stance on this notion of flat earth, especially in the church, or enclosed cosmology, or biblically enclosed cosmology, like I prefer? I believe that it is. And I believe most of you here have probably heard all the verses, but in short, almost 70 times the Bible talks about the sun, moon, and stars as moving, and not once describes the earth as moving. In fact, it says it is fixed and immovable. It says that the earth is standing on a foundation, set on pillars, and that there is literal water above our heads directly beneath where God sits. And you say, Matt, well, that's Old Testament stuff, man. Well, okay. Well, then I'll ask you, what did Jesus believe? Did Jesus believe in our current heliocentric model? The answer is no, he didn't. And Jesus was involved in the entire process, right? According to John 1, he was there. And the way I read John 1 is that he was integral in the whole deal. We read Matthew 24, where Jesus says, "Immediately after the tribulation of those days shall the sun be darkened, and the moon shall not give her light, and all the stars will fall to earth." Fall from heaven. We learn a few things from this statement about Jesus. One, he does not believe the sun is a star because even though the stars fall, the sun is only darkened. The moon does not reflect the light of the sun. The moon gives off her own light, he says. 3, he doesn't believe that stars are billions of miles away because there's no large period of waiting for them to get here. And 4, he doesn't believe that stars are millions of times the size of the earth because even though they all fall to earth, stuff actually happens after that. And again, he would know because according to John 1, he was there at creation. Unfortunately, there's an attitude in the church today that if my pastor isn't teaching it, it's not important or it's a distraction. But that just makes me think of Steve Jobs when he was starting Apple Computer, when the marketing folks were telling him that people don't want personal computers. He said, well, how do they know they don't want it if they don't even know it exists? It's my opinion that most pastors, like most people, don't realize that there's a version of the flat earth that exists where everything in our daily lives can go on as normal, where the sun can still rise and set, where you can still leave in the west and come back in the east, and where you won't fall off the edge. The problem is that most people see videos debunking flat earth using proofs that flat earthers don't even believe in to disprove it. And most people in the congregation won't do their research because they're not being talked to by others in the congregation who think there might be a problem with what we're being taught. So the problem isn't with the pastor. He's just one person. It's with the congregation. It's with us. We have the knowledge. We have the ability. Therefore, we have the responsibility. We don't want to be like those in Romans that face the wrath of God for holding back the truth and unrighteousness. I have a buddy named Robert Forsch. A lot of you guys know him, but he's known as Eternal Perspective on Facebook and YouTube. And if you saw the Vice News clip from the Raleigh conference, he was the guy where they asked who was responsible for the deception. And he said, well, Satan, and then they cut him off to make him look like a religious kook. Well, I've talked to Robert a number of times. Well, first of all, the telltale sign that you're not finished talking is when you stick your thumb out like you're about to list like 5 things. So I did a video with him, allowing him to finish his answer, and his answer is super powerful because he actually implicates himself in the deception because he homeschooled his kids. He said he got evolution right. He knew we didn't come from monkeys, but he taught the heliocentric model. And so Robert's question, the real question is, once you find out, in my opinion, the biblical truth, what are you going to do about it? And speaking of Satan, we really do need a good versus evil mindset to understand the motive behind the deception. To understand, like we established earlier, that through the physical revelation of God's creation, you can actually get to know the non-physical attributes of God. So, of course, the forces of evil are going to want to dilute that. And how do you dilute something? Well, you pour it into something bigger, like infinite space. And you convince people that they're merely statistical probabilities of an ever-expanding, potentially infinite universe. And how do you do that? Well, you control their minds. In George Orwell's 1984, one of the elites says to the main character, as he's addressing how they've created dual cosmology because it serves their purpose of control, he says, we control matter because we control the mind. Reality is inside the skull. And if you don't have a good versus evil mindset, did we lose me? Hold on. Can y'all hear me? Okay. If you don't have a good versus evil mindset, you're not going to understand that. If you don't have a good versus evil mindset, you're not going to see the connection to the fact that the word nasha in Hebrew can mean to lift up, like a rocket to space, or it can mean to beguile, like the serpent beguiled Eve in the garden. If you don't have a good versus evil mindset, you're not going to see the snake tongue in the NASA logo. And you're not going to get that the Hebrew word for tongue, lashon, can actually mean fork of flame. If you don't have a good versus evil mindset, you're not going to think it's weird that NASA was literally started by Nazis, Freemasons, and magicians. You're not going to understand Napoleon when he said that man will believe anything as long as it's not in the Bible. If you don't have a good versus evil mindset, you're certainly not going to get Max Planck when he said that a scientific truth does not triumph by convincing its opponents and making them see the light, but that his opponents eventually die and a new generation grows up that's familiar with it. You're not going to think it's weird that when you go on trial in the United States, they make you swear on a book that tells you not to swear oaths. It says let your yes be yes and your no be no in Matthew 5. If you don't have a good versus evil mindset, you're just going to think that seeing a snake in your path or randomly watching a Rob Skiba video is just a coincidence. So what's causing this state of passive indifference? Well, when it comes to the shape of the planet, we learn in 2 Thessalonians 2:11, God says that he will send a strong delusion in the last days. And it's interesting that the word planet in the King James is only used one time in 2 Kings 23, but it's actually mistranslated because the Hebrew word means constellation or sign of the zodiac. In fact, the word for earth only means land, soil, or ground, not capital E, planet Earth. The word planet simply means wandering star. And it's interesting how the word used in Thessalonians for delusion is the Greek word plane, which is the root word for planet. So the word planet as we understand it today as a place where I can get in a rocket and go land on is not used one time in the Bible. But its root word is, and it means delusion. So if God sent the delusion, why did he send it? Well, remember earlier when I said, I believe we have a God-given ability to recognize truth. Well, if we choose to accept it. In verse 10, it says that because people did not receive the love of truth, just like Rick was talking about before I came up here, because people did not receive the love of truth, for that reason, God will send a strong delusion that they may believe a lie. And it gets a lot stronger. It says that they might be damned who did not believe the truth. Now, is the shape of the earth that delusion? Maybe. If it is, we certainly see some heavy implications for not believing it. But regardless, we see a great importance attributed to this notion of truth. And if you do have a good versus evil mindset, you'll see that there currently is and has always been a great war against truth. In fact, postmodernists say that there is no absolute truth. But those same people's heads explode when you ask them if they believe that statement to be true. So if truth is so important, what's its function? Well, what did Jesus say about truth? He said that truth will set you free. Free from what, you ask? Well, free from slavery. You say, well, Matt, I'm not a slave. Okay, well, you're not wearing chains, you're not being beaten, but do you have any debt? Any debt at all? Car payment, mortgage, school loan, credit cards? The Bible says in Proverbs 22 that the rich rule over the poor and the borrower is a slave to the lender. And would you agree that debt on houses, cars, schools, credit cards, etc. is one of, if not the leading cause for our inability to slow down, take time, read the Bible, and consider the nature of our world and evaluate truth? I would. And is it not the exhaustion caused by that slavery that leads us to want to relax by getting caught up in TV shows, movies, sports, and things that we can passively absorb as opposed to actively pursue? That includes relationships, by the way. That happened to me. Because I think you will all agree it's easier to believe a lie than it is to actively pursue and discern truth. It takes research, it takes diligence, and above all, it takes time. Time that slaves typically don't have because they're distracted working through their debts. And I'm not innocent in this, by the way. It's a fact that the days that I come home the most mentally tired are the days that I just want to sit down and watch something. And you've all heard, you can't serve two masters, right? Well, you can't be a slave to money and debt and the rich and be a slave to truth. Don't get me wrong, money is an awesome servant, especially when you have it working for you. But it's a terrible master, and it has most of us distracted. I'll give you my favorite distracted story. So, towards the end of college, I was helping a buddy of mine move out, and we had to grab this extremely heavy set of drawers. My friend and I started to lift it from either end while a third buddy was getting the door for us. And so as we moved out into the area of the third floor where 3 other apartments opened out onto this area, I get into a position, we're about to go down the stairs, and I'm in a position where I literally cannot set this thing down. My third buddy, who's supposed to be looking out for my well-being, decides to go behind me and pull my pants and boxers down all the way to my ankles while I'm holding this thing, and I can't do anything about it. Totally epic, right? I was so focused on the drawers that I was carrying, I lost focus on the drawers I was wearing. I didn't even notice a guy walking around me with the intent to pull my pants down from behind. And if that is not an illustration for what's going on, I don't know what is. We can read the Lord's Prayer in Matthew 6. It says, please forgive us our trespasses, right? Well, if you read in the King James, it says, please forgive us our debts. Why would we need forgiveness for our debts? Well, because they're getting in the way of our pursuit of truth. Now I agree that debt and credit are something that this society is based on. And if the Bible describes debt as slavery, of course this world is going to make debt, lines of credit, something easy to get and seemingly normal. And yes, the far majority of people have debt, and it ranges from a lot to a little. But let's not forget the words of Mark Twain, who said, as soon as you find yourself on the side of the majority, it's time to pause and reflect. Now, this is extreme, I know, but I only say it to hopefully get you thinking in a different way. Understanding that money, in the sense of dollars, doesn't exist in the same way that inches don't exist. You have to have something to measure. In that same way, like you can't go grab a few inches, you can't go grab a few dollars. Okay? The actual paper dollar is only worth its ability to burn or wipe something. It's just another element of control. Another way to keep us enslaved. A way for us to work for something that they can arbitrarily change the value of overnight. So it truly doesn't represent anything. My daughter's grandmother came over here from Romania to get out of communism. She said that because the government was coming in and taking hold of all the farmlands and assets, it created a huge underground cash-based market, so people were taking cash, hoarding it in their mattresses to try and hold on to some of their assets that they had. Well, the government caught wind of this and overnight changed the currency and said they would only honor what people had in the bank. So you had people that literally went from millionaires to poor overnight. The U.S. is currently doing the same thing. It's just a gradual process at a slow rate. We're like frogs in boiling water. So if the value of paper money can be changed or scrapped entirely overnight, it truly doesn't represent anything. Material value, material wealth, doesn't come in the form of paper. It comes in the form of resources and energy. And how many people here, including myself, have zero ways to produce their own resources and energy in the form of food, shelter, heat, etc.? How many people are working to change that? How many people think they should be? If you have $100,000 in the bank, take it out in hundreds, pretty soon all you're going to have is a really pretty fire or really dirty napkins that don't work very well. And that's only material, worldly wealth. But real eternal wealth comes in the form of relationships. First and foremost, a relationship with your Creator. And secondly, a relationship with all these people that are on the ride with you. A close relationship with your Creator and the others around you can teach you how to be rich as opposed to how to get rich. I heard a pastor say this the other day, and I liked it, so I'm going to use it. That I personally am in the top 2% of the world when it comes to material wealth because I make over $25,000 a year, which is probably the majority of the people in this room. So if you were to take 100 people, line them up, random people across the world, line them up in terms of material wealth, there would only be 2 people in front of me. Now, if you were to take those same 100 people and line them up in terms of real eternal wealth, where would we fall? That's the real question. Remember, we're going to take these meat suits off one day. And my goal is to walk so closely with my Creator that you can't get in front of me. You might could tie me, but you're not going to beat me. And how can I do that? Well, again, the book that I deem as truth says that I can get to know the invisible attributes of God through the study and appreciation of His creation, which literally speaks to us in every language. And if there's something or someone standing in the way of that, shouldn't that be important? Shouldn't that be worth at least discussing? God doesn't want something from you. He wants something for you. And that doesn't mean getting more. It might mean needing less. Because someone who isn't lacking, someone who doesn't need anything from anyone is invincible. They're powerful. They're not a slave. They're not controllable. And thus, they're not corruptible. One of my favorite lines from the movie Fight Club is, it's only after we've lost everything that we're free to do anything. This next example is with people, but you can apply it to megachurches, Christian research organizations, scientists. But if you had one guy who owned 5 pizza restaurants, and you have another guy who owned 5 pieces of pizza, and God came down and said, I want you to give away everything and follow me down this path, who's that going to be more difficult for? And He may not ask you to give up money, by the way. He may ask you to give up your reputation and stand up and look stupid for the veracity of His word. Or maybe spend a little time reaching out and encouraging others that are. So what's the solution? Well, when I was playing tennis and having arm trouble, I had to change the way that I played. I literally had to change the way that I swung the racket because it was important enough for me to keep going, to keep improving. So I invite you to consider that if this is important enough, we need to change the way that we view things like debt, slavery, control, and most of all, the importance of truth in our lives. We've established that debt leads to slavery and truth can set you free. But that's what Jesus said. And the truth has actually set me free because it's been that pursuit of truth that has led me to downsize my lifestyle, pursue forms of income that aren't tied to the amount of hours I work, and avoid debt at all costs. And because I don't owe anybody anything, and because I've built margin into my life, I'm not triggered by the events on the world stage. I don't swallow things just because a pastor or a politician or someone of authority says it. I make up my own mind about things. I decide who I associate with. I decide how to raise my daughter. And the system is slowly losing its hold on me. So I invite you guys to pause and reflect for about 5 minutes this weekend and work backwards from the lifestyle that you want to live or what you want your life to stand for. And if the things that you're pursuing personally and professionally or the people that are in your ear right now aren't leading in that direction, get rid of them. Don't be a slave forever. Not all prisoners live behind bars. It's a slow process unraveling from the system. but a worthwhile one. I invite you to jump in, start swimming, and don't save anything for the way back. If the lives that we're living aren't forcing us into deep reliant prayer regularly, we may not be picking a big enough fight with the devil. Or as Romans describes, we may not be picking a big enough fight with those that are holding back the truth and unrighteousness. Bottom line, it's just super powerful to be willingly open with people about what you believe. Yeah, I'm a flat earther. Or yeah, I believe in biblical cosmology. And while some people have a household where spouses may believe two different things, and it may be taboo to teach your child about flat earth, I'll tell you this, my daughter knows what I believe, and I'm not indoctrinating her. I'm not taking advantage of her youth. She simply has a dad who's bold enough and willing to stand up and declare exactly what he thinks is true. And that's only going to have a positive influence on her, by the way, as she grows up. I don't want her to grow up to be like most people. Most people are walking around asleep. Most people are walking around like they're coming back, like they're going to get a second chance. I don't believe we get a second chance. The other day I heard this great story of an older woman in Cuba that was there spreading the truth, as I believe it. And she hopped on a dump truck and immediately knew she was in a precarious situation because there were a bunch of construction workers on there, which dump trucks, by the way, down there, that's like their public transportation. So there were a bunch of construction workers on there. She didn't just randomly jump on a dump truck. So she got on there to go over where she was going, and she immediately knew she was in danger because it was all guys. And she was groped from behind and turned around to confront the guy. And when she turned around, she was groped again and again. And she then stood up and proclaimed her love and protection from Jesus and was able to make it out unharmed. And the director of this mission told her story to an American CEO that was so inspired that he wanted to travel down there, buy her a car, so that she didn't have to deal with that anymore. He sat down with her and asked, if I could get you anything that would exponentially help your ministry and keep you safe, what would it be? And she thought for a second and said, I could really use a flashlight. And the other night I was in a dark room. I grabbed my phone to turn on my flashlight, but I accidentally hit the calculator, which did me absolutely no good in that moment. And it hit me like a ton of bricks that when navigating through a dark realm like this place, light and truth will help you way more than math and science will. Thanks. People say that the Bible is not a science book. Well, you're damn right it's not. Because science books were written by man in an attempt to describe the things of God. But the Bible, you have to decide who wrote that. And the only way you're going to know is if you read it and test it. It plainly tells you the what and the why. And believe me, there is immense value in learning the how, but it's far less important than the why. I believe that the shape of the earth is super important, but not nearly as important as recognizing that truth is good and that there is and always will be a war against it. But you have to have a good versus evil mindset in order to recognize that. If you don't, you're just going to get lost in the dark. You need to use the light and the truth to help you find your way. And at some point, you might find that those three things are actually the same thing. Or as I say, the same person. So, thank you.